Okay.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, dummy load. That's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Can you send that to me, Chris?
Sure.
Oh, that's for 5 volts. I
Yeah.
probably could modify it.
Yeah. Let me just turn that off. That's where that came from, anyway.
Okay. I could always go back to my gel cells, which aren't very smart. That's
Yeah.
probably what I should use. It's just that those celestron packs are so handy. They don't take very long to charge, which I really like. The gels take a while to charge.
Oh. Hi, Jay.
Everybody hear me?
Oh yeah.
Coming in loud and clear.
I never tell with this computer. Every time Windows updates, video quits working, sound quits working, and it updated last night. So.
Well, Jay, I've had my computer hacked, so every time I'm on one of these Zoom meetings, it's an adventure. So if I disappear, Chris Purse, our technical host, will take the reins. So I'm confident we're in good hands. And thank you very much for joining us. It's a bit later over there in Winnipeg than here, so I hope you're holding up well.
Well, I don't ever go to bed before midnight anyway, so.
Well, thanks for agreeing to do this. We really appreciate it.
Did
You're
someone
welcome.
say winter peg?
I beg your pardon?
Did someone say winter peg?
Oh, well, we haven't got much winter here yet.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. I was worried there for a second.
Yesterday it got up pretty close to 20, but today I think it struggled to make it to -4. Sort of typical Winnipeg transition. I figure any day past November 9 that doesn't have snow is a bonus. I see Les's name is here, but I don't see him yet.
Les,
Looking good, Reg.
We're
1988 was a few years since I've been in the weather office up there.
Yeah.
Although I used to get into Victoria semi-regularly, but not anymore until I get this virus out of the way.
Yeah, that's cramped our style, all right.
Oh, well, virus has got its vaccine today, so we'll see how that goes. I said to my wife, you know, can't invest in the vaccine company. It's too late for that. But there got to be a company out there that makes the needles that are going to be needed to inject 7 billion people with them. So who's making those?
Or just the swabs to wipe the patch.
Yeah, now you go and buy a whole bunch of stock in some company that does needles and find out that all you have to do is take a swab or swallow a pill or something and you're okay.
Yeah.
I've got a chat here somewhere. Oh, I see Les is got a friend of mine watching with him. I should bring up my wife to say hello.
Good evening.
Hi, everybody.
What, Judy?
Let's see.
That's a good collection of radios you've got behind you there, Chris. Are you an amateur?
Yes. Yeah.
Operator? Oh, what's your call sign? There's
VA7 CKP.
CKP. And here's Reg.
I was just checking in on the WARA net before I joined here, so have to make sure they get their net over with fairly quickly so that I can join up at 7:30.
Yeah, yeah. I had mine on earlier, but I didn't get to call in tonight. So it didn't work out.
There's two hams. Here's another ham here.
Oh, right. Yes, yes. Malcolm. Right.
Victor Alpha 7 India Sierra Sierra.
Cheers.
Nathan,
For some reason I thought you were V7DAO, which I thought was particularly appropriate, but well.
I have two call signs, so I use ISS once in a while, and people think I'm calling from the International Space Station for some strange reason.
Nathan, towards the end of the evening, we'll try and show your GIF about Mars, okay?
I just picked up a new telescope the other day. One of these automatic EV scope that Sky and Telescope has a review on. Hasn't been clear yet, but just park it in the backyard and go out after 5 minutes, or don't go out. You look at your cell phone and it'll ask you what you want to see, and you just say go, and it'll download the picture to your cell phone. I'll never have to go outside anymore.
What's the aperture of that, Jay?
It's a 4.5 inch, but it's capable of actually detecting exoplanets.
It's a CCD after all.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, it's a Sony chip they've got in it. Could be.
Did you say phony or Sony?
Sony is.
Sony, thank you.
I bought it for the RASC here, the Kickstarter project. I don't particularly need it myself, but it looks kind of neat, so I think I'll play with it for 6 months and then offer it to the RASC, because you can form a little wireless hub with it, and up to 10 people can dial in. So you can go to a star party and tell this thing, you know, go to M31, and 3-4 minutes later, you get this full color picture M31 on everybody's phone that's dialed into it. So it could be really nice for public gatherings if we ever get back to that again.
David, that's what we need.
Yeah, we do.
Sounds promising.
There's lots of possibilities, obviously. I mean, Jay's mentioning a commercial one that's built for that, purpose-built for that.
I think it was really expensive though, wasn't it? About 3,000 US.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I got it for about half that because of being a Kickstarter investor. But you're right, the $3,000 current price on it.
Hey, we got.
Did you say it was a Celestron?
No, it's called Unistellar, UNI Stellar.
Huh.
But the scope itself is called an EV scope.
Yeah, there have been reviews on it in the literature. I mean, I think Sky at Night had one a couple of months ago.
Yeah, they've shipped, I think I'm probably one of the last to receive the telescope, except for small countries, because they ship by country. So they collected all the Canadians that bought one and made them and shipped them in one container to Canada. I think there was something like 32 sold in Canada, but about, I don't know, something like 2,400 of them altogether.
Jay, correct me if I'm wrong. There's another one too. I can't remember if it's made in Europe or whatever, but it's quite similar.
Yeah, there's another one that's about $1,000 more, and I saw a review on it that said you could get the same picture, but what took 4 minutes on the EV scope took 20 minutes in the other scope.
Oh.
It was probably just not using as sensitive a chip or something like that. It's kind of an interesting project because it was put together by a bunch of guys in France and Switzerland and Italy, and some of them sound like they had some heavy-duty bona fides. You know, they were actually technicians at professional observatories. So but they wanted to raise $250,000 to build this thing, and their first funding request raised 2.5 million. So they were able to afford some talent to do the business end of things, and it seems to have worked quite well for them. Oh, Laurie.
Okay, we've got a pretty
Hi,
good
Laurie.
crowd here of 27, and more will probably join us. And so I'm going to start the meeting tonight, and by sharing the screen. And we'll go here, and I will play this. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, so tonight's we're gonna program. This is in our monthly meeting format rather than our more casual Astro Cafe. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. So we'll start out with our announcements, and then we will have our guest speaker, and I'm very excited to introduce Winnipeg Rascal Jay Anderson on eclipses around the globe. I don't really know what your formal title of talk is, Jay. I just made that up, so I apologize.
I've forgotten what it is too. So,
at any rate, then we'll after Jay's talk, we'll deal with some, I guess, show what's on our Astro Cafe web and discuss what else is coming up this week and other offerings. So. And Nathan has got a neat gift that he's going to try and show us about the planet Mars that he did in the last month or so. So looking forward to that. At any rate, for the announcements, my announcement as president is basically something that you might have seen on the web already, but this is John McDonald and I went up to the VCO last Saturday evening, November 7th, and it was really a nice night. It was cloudy very to begin with, and then boom, the skies cleared, and it was even in the VCO shed with a fair amount of glare from the monitor and that. We first took some test shots of Deneb, which was right overhead, and you could see a river of the Milky Way passing through, and that's not something I see that often, so that was a real treat. Real nice, peaceful evening up there. So this is John's image, and if you look at it, John did everything except center the image. That was left to me, and I kind of screwed it up, and so my apologies to John. John, do you have any remarks on this?
Oh, just that one of the things that was kind of fun about it is that we don't have the guider set up yet, so we were just taking 30-second exposures. And despite that, we got quite a nice image. And it struck me that, you know, when people who are not all that serious astro imagers want to stick a camera on and not take the time to get guiding going and everything, you can still get quite a lovely picture fairly quickly on a system like we have up at the hill with a quite nice mount holding it and whatnot, and it worked out quite well. I've taken pictures of M27 several times, and even though we didn't have a very long exposure, and it was only a test, I got the best picture of it I've ever had, so I was kind of pleased.
Reg, we're still on your title screen, by the way. Did you?
Oh, did I
Did you mean to put the picture up, Reg?
Oh, you know what I did? I forgot. Guys, shame on me. I'll try and...
Oh, you shared the single thing, right? Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and go full screen on this. Thank you. Okay, there it is. Can everyone see it now?
Yes.
Good. Okay, one of the things that we are looking at is for oval stores in the corner of the image, and And you have to be really squint your eyes to see oval stars. So it seems to be performing quite well. This is a 12.5-inch Ritchie Cray-Chan, and it's optical guidance system telescope, a research grade scope. It's quite an old one, but we just put it up on our mount in the last couple of weeks, and we're just doing some tests with it. And John and I are pretty excited about it, and we'll continue to tweak with it. But it seems to be giving us usable results. So that's a good thing. And I'll leave it there for now, unless you have anything more to say. So the next thing is our vice president is quiet. Our second vice president, Margie, do you have anything to add?
I do not.
Okay. Is Bruce, the Sky News editor, here? I don't hear it. Is our treasurer, Deb, here? Well, Deb's balance from our last council meeting, which was held last Wednesday, was $11,090.64. And then membership, Chris has got a few things to add, I think. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so our current membership is 244. There are 14 people in the grace period. Just a reminder, maybe could you stop sharing for a moment, Reg?
I'll see what I can
do. This is a speaker view. I'm just going to say I've got the, see if I can do this without so much glare. If you can, I don't know if you can see that if you're in speaker view, that's the RASC calendar. Lori and I have some of those available. We've sold about half of them since they arrived, so they are going quickly. A reminder, they're $15, so either email me or Lori as per the instructions, and we'll try and make arrangements to get them to you. I did a delivery run this afternoon and saw some of the people here today in person, and it was good to see some people rather than just seeing them on Zoom. So that was quite nice. And the other thing I wanted to remind everybody is we have our AGM will be in February, and we have a number of council positions coming to an end. So we do need to nominate a slate, including a president and a vice president. Those people who are currently in other positions will be asked shortly if they are intending to continue in those positions. So we'll let you know if there are other positions that need to be filled. But it's critical that we get a president kind of elect in the wings there. Otherwise, this causes us great problems with the Societies Act as to whether we're kind of can continue without that position. I don't know if there's any questions about that. So calendars, and please consider stepping up to a council position if you're not already on council.
Chris, could I just mention that due to our constitution, the current president has to walk the plank at the end of 2 years. So I am getting off. So that's part of the situation we have here. I'm gonna. Can I share? I'll share the screen again here, if you just for a second, and we'll go back to this. And play again. Hopefully that you can see that. So the school program, Lori, have you got anything to add about that?
Push the button.
Yeah, Sid and I have been working with Calvin and Aaron up at the Center of the Universe in order to provide some online programming for schools. We're starting fairly slowly, but we have had some success, and we also were part of a Prodi for 13 teachers in Kamloops. So we are the FDAO has kind of broadened it up, not just to the lower Vancouver Island, but to everybody, and so we're helping out with that right now until such time as either people can get up to the center, or we can go back into the classroom. So we'll continue on.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Lori. Is Matt online for a technical committee report?
No.
How about website? Joe, have you anything to mention?
Not too much, really. The website's going great. People should check out our website. It's victoria.rasc.ca. These meetings are recorded and posted to our website. And of course, combined with our president's reports, there's quite a bit of news on the website, quite a bit of interesting stuff. Of course, if you're just interested in the videos, you can go straight to our YouTube channel. And we also run a Facebook page for those that are interested. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Joe. We've got two of our National Council reps tonight. Nelson, do you have anything to share with us?
Only that the next meeting of the National Council is Sunday, December 3rd.
Okay, thanks. And Bill, do you have any thing to contribute?
Not there.
Apparently not. If Bill comes in later, maybe we can give him another opportunity to share anything. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. But I can't because I've got a problem in that the video stuff is covering my, I can't move my, oh, I get a second. There we go.
There we go.
Sorry, guys. All right, so yeah, we're at the main event, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jay Anderson. Now, Jay and I did time in Environment Canada together many years ago, and our paths crossed at the Pacific Weather Center in Vancouver, and then Jay went eastward. And many of you will know Jay's name from, he was the editor of the Journal of the Royal Astronomical Society for a decade, and he is still works on the notes section, which I really enjoy because he's keeping me abreast on a lot of new developments in astrophysics, and there's so much going on. Quite often you miss one program, and Jay's always got something there. That's really my favorite part of the journal. So thanks for doing that, Jay. But Jay, from since 1978, I guess, when an eclipse occurred in Winnipeg, you got involved with the climatology with eclipse, and Jay became an eclipse meteorologist and traveled all over the world on cruise ships and all sorts of places. And he's created a very interesting, I guess, a secondary career, or maybe it's your main career now, of working on doing eclipse work. And he's going to be sharing some of his adventures with us tonight. So please go ahead, Jay. Thanks very much for giving this presentation.
Thanks, Reg. It was 1988 when I left Vancouver. So anyway, I've been kind of lucky in a way that meteorology got married with eclipse chasing, and all of a sudden people realized that if you want to see an eclipse, you best do it where there are no clouds. And so I've kind of dedicated 40 plus years to pointing out where the least likelihood of clouds are. Of course, it means that when I go to an eclipse, all of the spaces are filled up already, unless it happens to be in the middle of a city of 10 or 20 million where there's enough accommodation for the world. What I'm going to do today is kind of like what I did on my summer holiday. I'm just going to go around the world and talk about a couple of eclipses that are among my favorites, and some of them, because they didn't work out, weren't my favorites. So we'll just go right into that. Oh, there's the title. I'd forgotten what it was. So there you go, Rich. 4 decades. Most of these eclipses I go with my wife do them. So just about everything I've done here, she's done with me, which puts her up in the upper echelons of people who've gone to eclipses and the number that they've gone to. Let's see if I can get this to move on. Oh, there we go. So these are the eclipses I've been to. Actually, I'm missing one of them. But I'm doing a project right now to essentially catalog satellite pictures and maps of every eclipse since '79, which is when satellite pictures first came available. So this map is sort of taken from what I'm doing and will eventually put out on the web. When I look at a map like this, I see adventures that I've had. I see places where you take one of these snakes that's going across the country and you think about, oh, now let's see if I can get the laser pointer on this thing. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. And that didn't either. So
There you go.
that's probably the laser pointer. Okay, so you look at, well, it's not much of a laser pointer, is it? You look at something like this long, skinny one. Before I go to an eclipse, I usually scout the eclipse, and so I'll go to the places where it's going to be, and Travel Quest, who I work for, often takes me along on their scouting trips. So the weather was very, very good in Australia. Prospects there were excellent. But I was here in South Africa and got clouded out. But it's still a memorable eclipse. A busload of us driving down the backwoods of northern South Africa, right up against the Zimbabwe border, singing all the songs we could of that had sunshine in them. And sure enough, the sun finally broke through about 4 minutes after the eclipse was over. And I look at another one, and I see the one in Egypt where I had a lot of fun there, but I also got into Bolivia on that one. I see eclipse up here in the north at Svalbard, north of Norway, where it's probably the best weather I ever had for an eclipse for clear skies. And we'll show some of those things. And I'm looking at a few more eclipses coming up if we ever get this darn pandemic out of here. And one of them is in Australia, and that's one of my favorite places for going, not only for eclipses, but for the skies that they offer as well. Well, eclipses are kind of like gears in a car. You know, you've got an Earth going around the sun, and you've got the moon going around the Earth. And just like gears will all come back to some similar position if you revolve around them enough times. So the moon comes back into the right position to put a shadow on the Earth. And it turns out that that period between successive shadows can range anywhere from 1 month. There's not a range. It's actually 1 month, 5 months, or 6 months. And because, as you can see here, the image of the shadow here in January, the sun is on, or the Earth's on one side of the sun. You look at July, it's on the other side of the sun. So there's the 6 months apart. And because it's not an exact period, sometimes you sneak in 5 months instead of 6 months. If you do it in 1 month, it's a little bit more complicated. Essentially, because the sun and the moon have certain size in the sky, there's a range of places along the orbit of the Earth or the position of the sun where an eclipse is possible. And you can see that in this chart here, where we have, I've lost my pointer here, but don't worry about that, shut it off. You can see where the moon and the sun at a certain distance in their orbits apart from each other begin to touch. And then as they two lines cross each other, it comes a point, a range of, it's actually 12 degrees wide on the sky, where they can lie in front of each other. They may not be dead center unless they're exactly on the line where they cross. And finally, you've got a 36-inch wide area where they can partly cover each other if they're not in that magic 12-degree one. So you put all this together, you're basically looking at this gear system of the moon and the sun coming around enough times that they get back into this space at the right moment. And that happens most often either 5 or 6 months apart. Total eclipses, though, are somewhat rarer than annular eclipses, because in the diagram I'm showing you here, the moon is completely covering the sun in the top pattern. But of course, it doesn't always happen like that. If you took all of those eclipses and plotted them in a graph like this, where you see I'm running from 1900 to 2050, so 150 years of eclipses, and I put the time of year in them, it sure looks like there's a pretty regular pattern in that. And there's been kind of a cottage industry over all the years to make patterns. And they're really, really complicated, but when you look at them like this, they get really simple. So here's a pattern where you can see them separated by 10.9 years. So basically in this chart, anywhere you can line up a set of eclipse images or the dots that represent the eclipse, anytime you can line them up in a regular pattern, you've got yourself a cycle. So you can line this one called the Zolkinex, which was actually an important cycle to the Aztecs, 7.11 years. So you know that if you had one eclipse, you're going to get another one in 7.11 years. Might not be in your part of the world, so unless you've got a good long record-taking history, then you're not going to be able to remember it. So you need civilizations that keep good records. Here's one here down on the bottom, the Metonic cycle. That's important in the Greek and the Jewish calendars. And in that cycle at 19 years, the eclipses repeat themselves on the same day and time of year. And then, of course, we get the most famous of all cycle, which is this one called the Saros cycle at 18 and a bit years. And you can see that on any particular time, there's quite a large number of Saros cycles operating. So if you took all of these lines that you could draw on this chart and then say scanned along the 1980 line, you would cross a whole bunch of these Saroses. So you don't have to wait 18 years for an eclipse after you've had one, because there's another Saros cycle bringing one to you, roughly about 18-month periods. And it's one of the sort of fun things that eclipse chasers do, is to say, oh, I've seen an eclipse 1 Saros apart or 2 Saroses apart. You can see down here in the lower right, there is a period called an exeligmos, which is actually 3 Saros cycles apart. A terminology that developed by the Greeks. But almost all of these cycles, particularly the Saros cycle, were known to Babylonians. I like to think of the connections that you make during an eclipse. You connect yourself with the solar system when you stand under that shadow. And most of those pictures we get of eclipses, what causes an eclipse, you know, they show a fat sun and a fat moon and this great big thick shadow that terminates on the surface of the earth. But this is one that's drawn to dimension, so that you can see how extremely tiny, how needle-like that lunar shadow is when it reaches out from the moon toward the earth. Now, sometimes that shadow can go 23,500 kilometers past the Earth, so the moon is close enough that the shadow goes for quite a long distance. Other times it comes up short by almost 40,000 kilometers. And of course, the difference is if you get the one with the shadow going past the Earth, you get a total eclipse. And if it doesn't quite make it, then you get an annular eclipse, providing you put yourself in just the right place. And you can imagine a shadow that makes it to the point of to the part of the Earth that's closest to the moon, but doesn't make it out toward the edges, the shadow that just terminates in the middle of the Earth's disk. And that would be a shadow that's annular at the start and end of the eclipse and a total eclipse in the middle. And we're actually having a big and somewhat heated discussion on the solar eclipse message board about these so-called hybrid eclipses right now. Nobody likes the name hybrid, but a lot of ridiculous suggestions that come up for a new name for it. About this connection, here's a picture taken from Egypt in 2006, and in the upper left is before the eclipse starts, and at the bottom right is the middle of the eclipse, where you see that you are in a shadow with sunlight all around you, and you are in the center of that enormous sphere of shadow that's coming from the moon that stretches back to the sun. And all at once in this picture in the lower right, you're connected, you're part of the cosmos, so to speak. And eclipses are enough of a quasi-religious experience that making that kind of connection seems about right. And of course, I don't do much photography at eclipses, but my wife is into it a little bit, so this is one of her pictures. And this is approximately what you would see if you spent enough time at the eclipse and had enough of a memory, I suppose, to remember all the details. You won't see this if you don't prepare. And one of the ways of preparing is to cover one eye with an eye patch before the eclipse starts, so that one eye is dark adapted. And when the eclipse begins, the corona that you're looking here spreads out to 2 and 3 and 4 solar diameters that you can see because you're now able to pick up the fainter details, whereas those around you who didn't do that, who've been looking at the sun and dazzling themselves. But if you're going to do that, you're probably going to do things like miss the diamond ring or the best part of it, at least going into the eclipse, because that dazzling will reduce your ability to perceive all these fainter tones. And so it's one of the neat little tricks. You might not want to do that on your first or second or third eclipse, but when you get up to a fair number of them, you start experimenting with different ways to look at these things. Or if you get lucky and you have a 4, 5, 6 minute eclipse where you have time to try other things. Annular eclipses are actually pretty boring, really. I mean, the sun gets a hole in it and you were there, and you don't have that lovely sort of shadowed feeling that you do when you're in a total eclipse. But an annular eclipse close to the horizon gets very, very interesting because you're combining the effects of the atmosphere along with the eclipse itself. This was taken off the looking out over the ocean from California from a rather high vantage point. And when this eclipse sank into the ocean, there was a green flash on the lower limb of the sun, and a second green flash when the upper limb settled into the horizon. Something that could only be seen, a double green flash, during an annular eclipse. So as Reg mentioned, it started for me in Manitoba in 1979. It was a relatively warm winter day there. It was only -8 at the start of the eclipse and a little under -10 at the bottom, as you can see from the graph. I persuaded the folks at Environment Canada to take the temperature reading from one of our weather stations automatically every minute during the eclipse, or every couple of minutes, so that we could trace out the temperature and the dew point as it went down. We traced out the wind and other things too. They weren't too interesting. A couple of celestrons, I'm there with my brother-in-law, and I learned a couple of things on this first eclipse, things that I still keep in mind. Don't kick the power cord out of your telescope just as you come to second contact, that is, just as the eclipse starts. But if you do, have a plan B, and you immediately start moving the telescope manually. Don't set up on the center line. If you look at the picture in the lower left there, you'll see there are several contrails passing over top of the sun. from those aircraft that decided that they would fly down the eclipse track with their passengers at a pretty pricey rate to watch the solar eclipse. And of course, leaving a contrail for all of us. So if I'd positioned myself maybe a mile or two off of the center line, I wouldn't have been able to, or would have avoided seeing that. The other thing is to look at it. I spent all my time taking pictures of this eclipse, and it was truly magnificent because I was actually watching it through the camera viewfinder, but I was also trying to keep it centered, and I was also trying to change the exposures along the way. So in reverse of what I've actually done personally, I suggest you watch your first eclipse or first couple eclipses and then photograph them. Whereas now I've used to photograph them and now I watch them. 1983 in Java, I learned something else about eclipses and mountains. This is immediately after the eclipse. We were in a soccer field. We had a military guard to, I don't know why, but we had a military guard. Indonesia was interesting in those days. Islam has a special prayer for eclipses. And the government used that as an excuse to call everybody into the mosques so that they couldn't watch the eclipse. They were desperately frightened about damage to eyes, probably rightfully so, because we didn't have the eclipse glasses then that we do now with the same abundance. And so a very, very populous island emptied. There was nobody on the streets. Half of our group stayed here on the soccer field, and the other half went up the mountain into that cloud. That cloud wasn't there when they went up that mountain. It was clear. It formed during the cooling of the eclipse on the mountain, and they actually ended up trying to see the eclipse through what was for them fog. Some of you might recognize the character on the left that's standing beside me here, both of us with a beer in our hands, Jack Newton. Anyway, got the cat in the way here. In the center top, there was an English language school in the place we were in. Come on, get out of here. Cat's gonna step on this keyboard and then I'll be in trouble. English language school in Indonesia, and they adopted us. So each one of us in the eclipse group had one or two students who spoke pretty good English, would tell us all about local customs and the attractions and things like that. But because of the government's advertising about the danger of this eclipse, they were very, very frightened. They were very concerned about being out in the eclipse. So we actually stood in a circle and held hands with all of the ones around us who wanted to until the eclipse started. And of course, for those of you who've seen an eclipse, it's such a magical moment at that time that the fears just vanished right away. And of course, we get the comments that I always get from people who've never seen an eclipse, that it was the most magical thing in their life. An interesting aspect of that is that these fellows who are gathered here in the field are guards, so to speak, or here in the upper right, were instructed to come in before the totality started. They were not to stay out. And the guides tell us that the sergeant in charge of this group actually had a radio message just before totality, about several minutes, telling them to bring everybody in. And apparently what he said was, why do we come in? And everything's going fine here. They've been showing us the sun through their telescopes, and nobody here is concerned. No, orders are everybody come in. Everybody's coming in. Whereupon he says, hello, hello, I can't hear you. Hello, I can't hear you. Shut off his radio, and all of them stayed out with us to watch the eclipse. Now, the fellow in the lower left here, you can see he's got quite a substantial Newtonian telescope. He brought that in carry-on. Now, that was a day when carry-on was a little more generous, but it wasn't generous enough to bring this telescope, that battery, counterweights, and all of the accessories. So what he did when the group assembled to make the flight, we're all on the same, is he went around to each one of us and had somebody, can you take a counterweight for me? Can you take this? Can you take that? He carried his own telescope. And so the whole thing arrived in Salatiga in Indonesia, courtesy of everybody else in the group. And it's an era that will never come again, I'm sure. We had a good time. I find it common when we go to places, people put on dances and other ceremonies for people who are coming in to watch the eclipse. And it's really quite a good way, a friendly way to meet people from other countries and learn from them and teach them. India was a different experience. India was a very short eclipse in the order of 45 seconds long. And what that means is that the sun is barely covered by the moon. So that the inner atmosphere of the sun, just above the photosphere, the visible part that you see, this red area that you see in my picture in the upper left is called the chromosphere. Chroma for color. It's brilliant red color. And even this picture doesn't begin to capture that red. And it's a layer of the atmosphere which is very interesting scientifically because the corona of the sun, the outer atmosphere, is extremely hot, whereas the surface of the sun is only a little under 6,000 degrees Celsius. So how do you get from 6,000 degrees to several million degrees in the corona? And part of that energy flux and whatever's happening occurs in the chromosphere and on the photosphere, the lower surface, directly above the photosphere. Still a mystery that's having some attempts at solution. There are, again, some good ideas coming, and they actually seem to be multiple explanations that all gang up in the end and create this energy flux that gives the corona its high temperature. As far as watching this eclipse was concerned, it had to be one of the most comfortable ever. In the middle right, or upper right, I'm sitting at my observing site, and in the background behind me is the hotel that I'm in. It's a very early morning eclipse. In the lower left, you can see another view toward the hotel, and that little wall that people are standing on is actually the apron of the hotel swimming pool. And at least a half a dozen people watched this eclipse with their coffee in their hand, floating in the pool, which has got to set a record for the ultimate in comfort for watching an eclipse. One of the interesting things about India is there's a very good and very extensive history of astronomical observation, and while the two other lower pictures in the center and right are not of ancient manufacture, they come from the 1700s, they actually are some very, very sophisticated observing instruments for visual observing, for measuring the motion of the planets and the sun in the sky. Kind of like a 17th century version of Tycho Brahe's observational system. In front of me, and here in enlargement, you can see the equipment box that I brought my telescope with. And there's a stick on it. And on the top of that stick, which you can see magnified on the right, is a thermometer. And that little piece of cardboard is positioned in such a way that the thermometer is always in the shade. That's where temperature should be. A little bit of an ad hoc adaptation with folded paper and everything else too. It was a Radio Shack digital thermometer. And if you look on the left image down there on the ground is a beer bottle, which serves two functions. One was to hold a second thermometer down close to the ground and to be consumed at the end of the eclipse if it was successful or if it was unsuccessful. So I recorded the temperatures through the eclipse. As it turned out, I wrote them all down and then lost the piece of paper, but we also did a video recording, and so I could pick up myself reading the temperatures to my wife, who was writing them down at 1 minute intervals through this eclipse. And here's what it looks like. Now, as a meteorologist, I expected that the ground would cool during the eclipse. Well, because this is a morning eclipse, the red line here is actually the upper thermometer measurement, and the yellow line is the beer bottle measurement. And it is a characteristic of overnight temperatures that the ground is cooler than the air above it. And we can see that as after first contact, the ground temperature rises, the air temperature above it rises, and the two of them almost meet at the point where it says inversion breakdown. The inversion, which is what the colder temperature in the ground is called, is about to break down. And then we're halfway into the eclipse. The shutting off of the solar energy begins to take effect, and the ground begins to cool again and reestablishes the inversion. And this is a characteristic of all eclipses that occur in clear or partly cloudy skies, is that you set up this inversion. And essentially what we would say meteorologically is that the lower atmosphere decouples or disconnects itself from the upper atmosphere. And that means things like the wind will decrease because you're not transferring wind energy from the upper atmosphere anymore. Temperatures, of course, decrease. Dew points typically don't decrease all of that much because dew point's a pretty stable thing, but you can get dew if you had the right conditions or frost forming. Although in most cases, an eclipse doesn't last long enough for that. Anyway, you'll see after totality, a few minutes, similar to the pattern that we had in the 1979 eclipse, both temperatures start to rise, and eventually they become more or less equal, because once the ground warms up enough, it mixes with the air above it, then they all settle down at the same temperature. And you can see this in a little bit of a magnification of the difference here, where we get within 0.2 degrees of being equal temperatures at inversion breakdown, and then the ground cools more than the air above again. And it's sort of just a different way of looking at the previous graph. So we have legends or stories about things such as eclipse winds and winds changing in response to an eclipse, but certainly have to be careful that there are local effects that happen with an eclipse that may have nothing to do with the larger scale impact of a shadow moving across the Earth. You have to look over a much wider area to see if there are any larger scale effects. 1988 was the first eclipse I saw on a cruise boat, one called the Golden Odyssey. King Neptune in the background, and that's Leif Robinson from Sky and Telescope and myself being sacrificed to the gods as we cross the equator. Fortunately, the gods saw fit to use a rather gentle hand on us, and if you look into naval tradition, there are sometimes some rather unpleasant things done to people who are crossing the equator for the first time. And fortunately, they left that beard on, even though I had a lot of shaving cream on me. Well, during that eclipse, there wasn't a satellite link at the time, and the internet wasn't there. But I had the good fortune to meet a fellow from the Hawaii Forecast Office at a conference some 3 years before the eclipse. And I explained to him why I was going there and wondered if the Hawaii office could provide me with the forecast. And he said, yes. He said, we actually forecast for the US Navy over a very wide area of the Pacific. So I actually phoned the Hawaii office the day before the eclipse, talked my way through to the forecast desk, which is usually protected by 1 or 2 layers of bureaucracy. And they agreed to give me an aviation type forecast for my position for the following day. And when I called back the following day, they gave that to me and told me I was running into a small disturbance, something called an easterly wave in those latitudes, and I would have a choice of turning around and staying in front of it, or running at a little higher speed and going through it. And it turns out easterly waves have better cloud cover, less cloud cover in front of them than behind them. So in the middle of the night, I gathered in the cabin with the captain, and he said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And Leaf, and that's Steve Edberg in the background with Leaf Robinson, said, "I don't know." So I said, "Turn it around." He looked at the helmsman and he said, "Did you hear that?" "Yes, sir, do it." The problem was at the time is I was in my cabin and I was looking out a rather large window. It was no porthole, it was a window. And I would see a star in the sky. And a few minutes later, I'd look out again and the star was gone. And I was staying awake all night with the star first there and then gone. And I kept thinking, we must have a lot of cloud up there. And I got upstairs, I found out the reason was we were ahead of schedule and the ship was zigzagging back and forth along the center line of the eclipse. So in one moment, I was facing the star and looking at it, and the next moment, it was off at some 90-degree angle. So it was with considerable amount of glee that I got up in the middle of the night and went up to the bridge and found out that it was in fact mostly clear. However, we did see the eclipse. There's a picture on the left there with the ship. A fellow named Bob Little went out in one of the small boats and photographed the eclipse over top of the ship. But right after, we went through this easterly wave, and lo and behold, there was a water spout coming down out of the clouds. And because we'd taken a stop for lunch at that time, I was the only person who had a camera on the 350 people in the ship, on the ship. Well, Egypt was an interesting adventure. I went to Egypt 4 times to scout for the eclipse because it was proving to be so popular. When you go to Egypt, you find symbolism like this one in the upper left here, which shows, has been interpreted by some people as representing the eclipse and the corona. I'm not convinced of that, and this is not the best example of it, but it's an argument that can be made. I suppose Egyptologists, I find, have very fertile imaginations. But Egypt is certainly a land where you can do a lot of photography. Here is the eclipse site right on the Libyan border. They sort of look to the horizon there where you can see it, and that's in Libya. And to the right, what not shown is Hosni Mubarak at the time with his entourage. And they shut down all telephone communications. They towed all cars out of the area before he arrived. And just, there were Secret Service agents everywhere. A couple of hippie-looking guys in our crowd. And everywhere they went, there were 2 guys in suits following them, about 10 steps behind. Egypt is a land of monuments, and I put this picture from Luxor in because in about another 5 or 6 years, there'll be a total eclipse of the sun that goes right over top of this temple. And it probably will be a very, very prime observing site, but I doubt very much that you'll be able to get into it unless you happen to have a substantial position in the Egyptian government. Temperatures are also likely to be around 40 or 45 degrees at the time. You may want to give that one a pass. But the temple would provide a luxurious environment in which to photograph the eclipse. And I'm sure that those of you who are accomplished photographers could think of 1,000 different ways to frame this thing and to make a big impact in your photography. Egypt's also a place where you can be quite comfortable. This is one of our guides that was with us enjoying herself at the Cataract Hotel, where if you knew the right person, you could go and have a look at Agatha Christie's former bedroom and where she did some of her writing. This has to be one of my favorite eclipses in Madagascar. The center line was unreachable. There were no roads to it, and it was pretty jungly in what they call the Thorn Desert in Madagascar. So we went as far north as we could along the beach until we got to the riverbank that blocked us from going further north, and built this tent, or this thatched hut encampment. There were 2 people in every hut. There must have been 100 of us there, so you can imagine there were 50, 60, 70 huts. They had a 1-burner stove to feed those several hundred people, which was a challenge, even with a big pot of whatever made the menu. It was hot, and this was eclipse day. It was just perfect weather for an eclipse. You can see that it's getting toward evening, so the eclipse is relatively low in the sky. Unfortunately, we arrived the day before, and somebody had forgotten to mention that you could only get to this eclipse at low tide. So some people got in pretty early, and some had to wait until the late at night, which would be yours truly, because I'm sort of acting as a bit of a guide at the same time. And the shipment of blankets for everybody didn't come through. So temperatures fell to about 10 degrees that night. So everybody was in whatever clothing they had brought for subtropical Africa, trying to stay warm, waiting for the eclipse, and a very nice comet at the time there too. Madagascar is kind of an enchanting place. The eclipse was spectacular, and the sun set still with a small bite out of it into the ocean. But it's also a land of baobab trees and lemurs and people. And that's one of the nicest things about eclipses, is that you get to talk to people. And I've talked to Kurds in villages in Turkey, and I've talked to these folks that you see here in Madagascar. I've talked to Aboriginals in Australia. Just about everywhere you go, even sophisticated city folks at Buenos Aires. When you tell them about the eclipse and what's going to happen, you learn as much as you teach. In the lower left, our guide that was leading us through this part of the world. And to get to this place, which is as close as we could get to the center line, we had to travel on 4-wheel drive through these forests, similar to the one you see in the upper left. And there's no real roads. I'm showing a road in this one, but it's trackless, or heavily tracked, if you want to say that, because everybody just goes anywhere they want, and from village to village. And so we needed to ask directions along the way. And we find that the people in the villages really only knew the nearest 5 to 10 kilometers around them. So we would go from one village to the next village, picking up a guide at each village until we got to the place we wanted. But the guides that we'd picked up previously wouldn't go. They stayed with us. So we had a pretty full load by the time we got to the banks of the river we wanted to have a look at. So we asked if we could stay alongside this stream for the night, and got permission from one of the headmen in one of the villages. And so the next morning, our guide is cooking breakfast, but it turned out the place we picked was also a ford across this stream. And so all kinds of people came by in the morning, and it is the custom when you have food to feed people who drop in on you. So we ended up feeding about 30 people. But the fellow in the blue in the middle of this cluster of people, who was the owner of the company that was going to look after our tour when we got there the following year, picked up medical supplies from doctors that were given to them as samples by the drug companies. And he actually acted as this kind of unofficial doctor to all these people that came by, dispensing anti-malarials, antibiotics, things for stomach ailments, things like that, to the extent that he could, kind of a spontaneous pharmacy in a way. Very good experiences when you do these things. And I remember sitting down and drawing pictures of the crescent moon turning into an eclipse in that sand. And they weren't too actually surprised by the fact that the moon would go in front of the sun, because they actually have a pretty good idea of how stars and the sun and moon and even the planets move across the sky. What they were surprised by when I told them they would see stars in the daylight, and that was something they could not really understand. And I hope they saw it the following year when the eclipse actually happened. This little blue hut was where he stayed, and I've always told my wife that this is where I want to die. Yeah, it was a wonderful climate overlooking the ocean with a bunch of roche percé, or pierced rocks, out fishermen in the water, and a French chef in the hotel kitchen behind us who made a spectacular meal every night for us. We find the kids playing with found items, making their own outrigger canoes, and the ever-present baobab tree. Only one species of baobab in Africa, but something like a dozen or 2 dozen in Madagascar. Well, this was one of the more unfortunate eclipses in some respects. I was in South Africa for this one, and you can see that long string of cloud that the shadow runs right on top of as it comes down across the earth, and I was underneath that shadow cloud. We tried to get out from under it, but ran into an insurmountable problem, namely that we ran into the Limpopo River and a border with Zimbabwe, and no bridge to get across it. We could see the blue sky directly in front of us. With satellite images, probably would have been able to anticipate that a little bit, but didn't quite have the connection. This was also another interesting event, because we would stop along the road and ask people where the road went, and more often than not, the answer we got was that way, because we tend to think of ourselves, we know our neighborhood pretty well. You folks all know the south end of Vancouver Island, probably the north end, a piece of Vancouver, and the lower mainland. But when you're living in countries where you don't own a car and transportation is expensive and no reason for it, you really only understand the nearest area around you that you can walk to. Papua New Guinea was also one of the treasures in a way, and this one was for the people that were there. Everywhere we went, we got a greeting and dances, the dragon in the center, upper center there. People dressed up in their finery, wonderful colors and costumes because of the flowers and feathers and everything else. And we were also very, very welcome, because the ship we were on that pulled into these made about 4 trips a year, and they picked different places to land each time in order to spread out the money, essentially, that the tourists brought. But the word would go out several weeks ahead of time before we arrived, because the ship would let these communities know we were coming. And it went out by the drums, that, sort of the thing of history and movies. And that's how they communicated with the Highlands, and the people of the Highlands would come down with their souvenirs to buy. And a wonderful collection of them they were. The whole country is just, everything is a treasure to the eye. Upper left, we can see just, I'm not even sure what it is, just an ordinary piece of some daily utility that's been decorated. The masks that are for sale, the ebony, the workings, even the architecture and the way they build their houses. The drum in the upper right that they use for that communication. Some of the people on our ship bought the prow of a decaying canoe that was on the beach, that somebody there would have thought had no value, but which had a wonderful carvings on the front of it. So there was a real treasure to see the people and see the artworks and wander through their villages and talk to them and see what kind of lifestyle they had. And also to get some nice pictures. We actually got these when we docked in Australia at Cairns. So That's where the eclipse was. We were lucky in having a pilot for the harbor who knew what we wanted and moved us exactly the right position to be able to see between the clouds to pick up these pictures. These are done by Judy. Another thing Judy likes to do is to take pictures just as the surface of the sun is being covered or uncovered by the moon. And so here we see a sequence of pictures taken at essentially less than 1 second intervals, showing the covering up of the chromosphere from upper left to lower right, and how the mountains on the edge of the moon break up the chromosphere into beads, similar to the better known Bailey's beads, which occur when the photosphere is broken up. And the people that calculate eclipse tracks can use the pattern of breaking up to determine with considerable accuracy the size of the sun, because they know the limb profile of the moon so well because of satellites in orbit around the moon, that any deviations from their timing can be attributed to fractions of an arc second difference in the size of the sun from the size that they use to do their calculations. And so there have been some professional papers actually published that discuss some revisions to the size of the sun based on the pattern of beads that develop in the photosphere and the chromosphere as the sun goes in and out of eclipse. Now, the chromosphere is kind of a special thing for me, which we'll cover off in a minute. But here's an annular eclipse in Australia, and the sun rising in eclipse. One of the unfortunate aspects of this eclipse was that we couldn't see that cloud along the horizon until a few moments before the sun rose. We thought we had a lovely clear horizon, but about 200 kilometers away, there was a departing weather system, and this is what it left behind. But some of the people that were a little different position than we were able to get the sun right off the horizon with wonderful football shapes and distortions in it as it rose in this annular eclipse. So I don't give much truck to annular eclipses unless I can see them coming up at sunrise or going down at sunset, in which case they become a little bit more of a visual treat. Now, this is a real visual treat. This was in Uganda, 2013. This was an 18-second eclipse, and you can see in the upper right the picture just as the sun is going into eclipse, the last bead of light disappearing behind, chromosphere completely around the sun. It was so close to being an annular eclipse that just a few, probably hundreds of kilometers further distance of the moon would have turned it from a total to an annular. And the picture you see on the left is the sun in the center of the eclipse, and you can see the outline of the shadow in this picture. It's I don't think my laser pointer here is going to work very well, but there it is. This kind of shape here is the actual shadow. People always talk about seeing the shadow of the moon coming, but in fact, in any eclipse where the sun is relatively high, it's really just a wall of darkness that comes toward you. It's only when the eclipse is very low, and in this case, a very short eclipse, that the shadow becomes prominent. But even there, it wasn't all that prominent visually. It only really appeared in the photographs. And in this little movie loop, let me just start this thing here. Because I put this laser pointer on, it won't start for me. I might just do this. Let me get, I'll do it the easy way.
Dissipating, and the ship
Anytime, just all you have to do. Shadow, take your glasses off. Glasses off. Watch in that direction for the shadow coming. Just gonna back that up slightly. You should be watching for the shadow. Take your glasses off. Glasses off. Watch in that direction for the shadow coming. I can kind of sit in the back. That's not the way you want to be looking right now. We're going to do it. Yes, yes, yes. Look at the corona around that. I mean, the color, the cloud corona. There we go. Here we go. Diamonds coming. Bailey's beads. Good girl. Like the buffer. Whoa. There we go. Whoa. Whoa, look at the chromosphere. Oh, that's marvelous. Notice how the sun moves across the shadow. At the top, at 12 o'clock. Where's the shadow? Look at how bright it is all around up there. Diamond ring. Oh, wonderful. Oh my gosh. No, in a minute. No, honey. Now, during this eclipse, you watch the sun move from one side of the shadow to the other. And that's the beauty of having a short eclipse or an eclipse with the sun low down in the sky, where you actually can see that somewhat conical shape of the shadow as you begin to see the relationships between, well, this magical connection with the solar system that I talked about earlier. This was a bit of a challenge, this eclipse. We had a lot of cloud in the sky, and about 20 minutes before totality, I actually moved our entire group. Normally that wouldn't have been a problem, except that the president of Uganda also decided that our choice of eclipse site was going to be his choice of eclipse site. And so there was this massive entourage of soldiers and people and bureaucrats, and we had to dodge through all of them to find an empty field a few kilometers away from our planned location and get this view of the eclipse. So we managed to find that little opening that was necessary, and a very, very magnificent eclipse in those days. So I talked about the chromosphere, and one of the things I like to do is look at the flash spectrum. Now, you get a spectrum of the sun and you look at it with the spectroscope, you see a bunch of dark lines that go across the spectrum, and those lines represent the elements inside the, or in the sun's surface, the elements that are in the chromosphere, because as the light from the sun comes through the chromosphere, certain wavelengths of it are absorbed in the chromosphere, and therefore there is a reduced amount of light when you look at it spread out through a prism or through a diffraction grating. And so you see dark lines. But when the underlying surface of the sun is covered up, those dark lines suddenly become bright lines. They're fluorescing. And so what you're seeing is the fluorescence of the gases in the sun. And this is what you see. This is not my picture. Again, I prefer to watch. So all I do is hold a $3 diffraction grating up to my eye and watch this thing. And it lasts for in the neighborhood of 5 seconds at the start of an eclipse, and another 5 seconds at the end. So you can see there are 4 bright lights here, mostly due to hydrogen, but there's some helium and sodium in there. But they're sort of visible, many other lines in there, which if you use the proper equipment, you can, there'll be thousands of them. But the spectacle is rather incredible. And when it's all done, you start to think, well, what did I see? And you suddenly realize there's so much detail that you have difficulty remembering more than just the gross details. And at the same time, you'll also occasionally see, especially if you look for it, the spectrum of the corona itself, which won't be a narrow curved line like this, but a big sort of feathery donut. Baja, Mexico, I had to get a weather report. We had quite a few people with us, and there were no internet where we were. The only way to get a weather report was go to the local bar in the lower left and persuade them to put on the Weather Channel. They were extremely reluctant to do that because there were 2 people in the bar. It was early morning, hardly anybody there. And they were watching women's mud wrestling and did not want to interrupt it for the weather report. So we were promised 1.5 minutes, which you can see us watching here. And they didn't talk about what was happening in Baja. But we had a good crowd and the weather was clear. And it was an almost 7-minute eclipse. So it was a spectacular, long time to do whatever you wanted, including what I was doing, which was watch the flash spectrum. It wasn't good for everybody. Here's a picture of Baja. The folks at the Vancouver Weather Office sent me satellite pictures by fax, but unfortunately they pointed in the wrong place, so I wasn't able to find them. But the 4 panels in the upper right, you can see in the middle of the Baja Peninsula there a little drool of cloudiness, and that drool of cloudiness expanded during the eclipse. So the people that went right to the center line, the view they had of the eclipse is the one you see in the bottom of the picture. Now that area where the cloud formed is in the mountains, so the people that went there violated the rule I learned in Indonesia back in 1983, which is don't watch eclipses in mountains. It's something I violated myself. This was spectacular in Svalbard, crystal clear skies. You can see what the eclipse looked like. On the left there is the drawing my wife made, and she made this several hours after the eclipse on what she remembered from it. And it's she has a spectacular memory for these sorts of things, but full of descriptions of the prominences, the kind of corona. And when you matched it up with the photographs people took, it was surprisingly, well, maybe not surprisingly accurate. It was accurate. Svalbard is a wonderful place to go, and it has absolutely no immigration regulations. You get off the plane and you're there. You don't check in with anybody. You can stay if you want. It has no social welfare, though. So if you can't support yourself, the governor, who has absolute authority, will put you on the first plane out and you're gone. Don't break any rules while you're there. You can't go outside the city without a weapon because of the polar bears, so you generally have to have an escort. And although they're not visible here, this crowd of us, which was a mixture of all nationalities, was basically guarded by about 6 guys with rifles, but too big a crowd to any polar. The Japanese fellows that came brought very, very nice equipment, all kinds of computer operated stuff. But unfortunately at -20, the computers still work, but the screens don't. So they couldn't see the screens to control their programs, and they had to go with plan B. 2017, I'm sure a number of you saw it. I have this sort of movie thing here, but it turns out that it's hard to decide what kind of exposure to use. And I wasn't pointed at the sun. I wanted to see if I could see the shadow coming. But as you can see, when the eclipse is high in the sky, it's just a wall of darkness that comes at you. It's not a well-defined shadow. When you look at the satellite pictures of that, you can see the clouds building down in here in Arkansas just before the eclipse, and then they dissipate and then they reform. So eclipses are pretty good at getting rid of small cumulus cloud as they cool. But up here in the top, you'd see none of those thunderstorms appreciated any impact from the eclipse. They just kept on building, and unfortunately wiped out the eclipse view for a few people in Nebraska and Illinois and along the way. So if you think you might like to go and see an eclipse, here's a few of them coming up. Of course, we have this one in 2023, which is an annular eclipse down around the Four Corners area, or if you don't mind taking a chance with the weather up, you can get that in Oregon, almost at the same place that the 2017 eclipse was. And then, of course, we have the 2024 eclipse, which has got crummy weather all the way through. So if you want to see that and stay in North America, you go to a place called Junction, Texas, which is right about there. If you want to have better weather, a little security, go to Mazatlan, right there, where it's a very, very good weather conditions. We have this eclipse that's swinging through here coming up, but I don't think we're going to be seeing any of those eclipses. And the Antarctic one here, your ticket to that's going to be minimum on aircraft 25,000. So the next really possible eclipse is this one in Australia, and probably on a cruise boat in the Timor Sea here, because this has got very limited accommodation at a place called Exmouth, and it's probably all booked. And the nearest place to stay is about 300 kilometers away. So thank you very much for your time. And I hope you all have a very good eclipse. If you want to check out the weather along the way, you can check out my website at eclipsophile.com, and it'll keep you abreast of what's coming up in the next 3, 4, 5 years and what the weather prospects are for each one. So thank you.
Oh,
Well, thanks
thank you
very
very
much.
much, Jay. Thank you.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Does anyone have any questions for Jay?
Who's going to go see an eclipse in 2023 in Arizona?
Going to see an eclipse in
I see.
2021, June 10th.
Well,
I'm planning on Mazatlan for 2024.
Yeah, 2023 in somewhere. Arizona is actually pretty good. It's in August of 2023, so it's a good weather time of year. You can go down and sit in any one of a number of Bryce Canyon, for instance. You could sit there and watch the eclipse go overhead. Doesn't quite hit the Grand Canyon, but it's not a bad eclipse to go look for, although it is an annular.
So if you go on to Jay's website, he gives the really detailed weather predictions and climatology for the various eclipses. And I know there's one down in southern end of Chile and Argentina. And I was quite interested in reading your descriptions there, Jay. But I imagine a lot of people signed up for that and had to cancel recently.
Yeah, all of the tours have been canceled, although there's a few people talking about flying to Sao Paulo, flying into Chile and to look at it, and immediately getting back on the plane and flying out again. But then, of course, Sao Paulo, Brazil is okay about going into. They have no restrictions, but the minute you touch down in Canada, you're good for 2 weeks in isolation, especially with Brazil's coronavirus. The best chances we have are going to be the Antarctic eclipse in 2022, 2021, because there's some hope that the virus will be under control by then, especially with the promise of some vaccines. But you know, if you want to go and sit on the polar ice cap, and Travel Quest, the company I work with, has a trip to the ice cap, you're talking $50,000 American. That's the price the company that owns the camp on the ice charges for a visit. A cruise boat, you know, you want to go to the National Geographic cruise boats, you're talking 30,000 country. So, and the weather, except on the ice cap, is you've probably got about an 8% chance of seeing the eclipse. So that's why I say Australia is the next reasonable prospect for an eclipse, and the annular coming up in the United States. Unless you want to come over to Winnipeg next June, there is an annular eclipse that starts in Northwest Ontario and goes northward. You could fly to Iqaluit to see it. You could come and drive along the Trans-Canada Highway towards Sudbury and stop at Terrace Bay and hope to see it coming up at sunrise, which is the time I like to see annular eclipses. So you don't mind a drive or a flight into Ontario, that's a possibility. Certainly the one I'll be taking, I'll drive down at the very least, but it's possible I might fly north and try and see it in the Arctic.
Okay, Jay, how many eclipses have you seen?
31 so far.
Wow.
I just counted them yesterday because I knew somebody would ask me that. But yeah, there's a website actually that somebody in Germany maintains where eclipse chasers can go in and put the position where they've been for each eclipse, and it'll actually make a map for you showing all your eclipse locations, calculate the total time you've been under totality and everything else. So, but normally, I don't know how many of those eclipses are total. It's somewhere in the low 20s, I think, but something like that.
Jay,
I have
John
a question
McDonald
about
here.
your forecasting. You were talking about the boundary layer where the lower and upper atmosphere decouples during an eclipse. So how does that affect your use of historical records to get a useful forecast?
Not very much, Joe, because the decoupling is probably in the time of an eclipse, it's sort of an hour-long period when it can happen. The decoupling is probably only going to reach 20 or 30 meters up in the atmosphere. But what does affect it is this cooling that comes in with eclipses, because just as it can do away with cumulus clouds, it can cause stratus clouds to form. That patch of cloud that formed in the Baja that I showed you over the peninsula was probably as a result of cooling of the moist layer, but I think there were also some downslope flows. Cool air likes to flow downhill. I think there were some other flows involved. But with the hour-long time period that you have, the atmosphere doesn't have a lot of time to respond. If you go into the mountains, say the Okanagan, and when the sun goes down, very few minutes after sunset, you can start to feel the cold air drainage going down the hills into the Okanagan Valley itself if you're on a road or on a house that's up on the hillside. And the same thing will happen in an eclipse. And so that air coming into a valley can lift the air upward and cause it to condense into cloud, or it can simply cool a moist layer. If there's already cloud there, like the cumulus, it may just flatten out. I don't have enough satellite pictures or pictures of what was happening in Baja to be able to diagnose exactly. But there have been cases in the Philippines, for instance, where broken stratocumulus just formed a solid layer of stratus. So there are certainly effects. I try to stay out of mountains because the terrain flows get so complicated that it's hard to evaluate. But mountains are okay in a desert environment. The one in Indonesia where it's so humid to begin with. You kind of have to adapt to each one of them. And El Niños and La Niñas have an impact too on the amount of cloudiness in these countries.
Thanks.
Okay, is there any more questions? Well,
Make a comment. Jay, quite a few of us went down from Victoria for the 2017 one, and we made a lot of use of the information you have put out for us. So thank you very much for that. And also for this talk. It was interesting. I learned quite a few things that I didn't know.
Well, you know, I go to eclipses for the travel and not for, after you've seen as many as I have, they do start to blend together. I'm not going to say once you've seen one, you've seen them all, but maybe once you've seen 25, you've seen them all. But the people and the places are what makes it worthwhile. And I only talk about the places where I watch the eclipse, but there's usually 2 or 3 other countries that are visited along the way in these trips. And I also do the scouting trips with Travel Quest. So I'll sometimes visit, Easter Island 3 times before. Most people don't get more than one chance to go there. So it's been an incredibly rewarding assimilation of meteorology and eclipses.
Well, thank you also for the depth of detail that's available from observing each of these eclipses, things that I was not aware of, such as the switch from emission to absorption lines and back. Fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, diffraction grading $3. That can be the best thing you ever took to an eclipse. Well, thank you all very much.
Well,
Thank you.
Jay, thanks very much. And as a token of appreciation, we will be sending you one of our coveted beer goblets in the mail. So offline, I'll get your mailing address and it'll be coming your way soon. So thanks very much. We're going to continue our talk with a few things that we have locally, and you're welcome to stay with us.
I'm going to do that.
Okay, good. Very good. So I'm going to share the screen again, and what we'll do is go to this. And this is our web page. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so for the November 9th Astro Cafe, I've got another picture of the dumbbell taken by John McDonald. And I think the thing that I never really mentioned with that, we've got that new scope that we just put up on the hill in October. This is the first image that we used actually a series of exposures that John stacked to give us an idea of how it's performing in that mode, and we're pretty encouraged by it. Then Jim Hesser mentioned a public lecture that's going to take place tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and here's a link to it. And this is Joel Premack is a professor emeritus at Santa Cruz, and it's basically on the latest discoveries regarding cosmology, and Jim thinks we might find that of interest. Also on the National Weekly web, we have a list of things that are coming up, and there's really quite an interesting talk taking place regarding Venus, and it's the speaker is Clara Silva, and she is a postdoctoral fellow of an unusual name, 51 Pegasi b, and that happens to be the name of the first exoplanet that was detected in 1995. So at any rate, her talk is going to focus on some of the latest discoveries associated with seeing phosphine in the Venusian atmosphere, and the potential that this has as a biomarker. So that might be really quite interesting. And the talk will be available to watch at a later time on the YouTube channel here. So that's really good. So I looked in a little bit more about this Pegasi b, 51 Pegasi b, and it was discovered by two gentlemen in December 1995, and they got, in 2019, they received a Nobel Prize for part of that business. Now, Randy Enkin is a guy who has quite a few associations with Nobel laureates, and he shared some of his experience recently. And I was just looking at this fellow here, and his he has this kind of a similarity. It looks like he could be one of Randy's brothers. So I think there's another connection there for you, Randy. So there you go.
My long lost brother. I only have sisters.
Yeah. So you never know what you find when you're digging around in this. I'll just go back here. There's some other interesting things coming up. Let's see. Most people get these things. I just thought I would show this. But The Moon by Patrice Scatolin, he's going to be doing a history of the moon. and that's going to be on Tuesday. And this would be at 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then there's another interesting thing regarding the native astronomy watchers, and you might want to dig into that. And then on Friday night, November the 13th, at this would be 2200. That would be what is it? Three hours from that. It's a bit earlier in the rest of in BC. A talk on the Sunshine Coast, and this person is an astrobiologist, Teresa Fisher, and that could be good. You can just click here to join that. And finally, there's a beautiful image which won the Astro Image of the Week by Art Cole. And there's also a new publication, the 2021 Nighttime Sky, the Night Sky Almanac is available. And observing targets Mercury's elongation in the early morning hours. You might be able to see that. And so plenty of stuff to look at here. So I'll leave that to you to dig in. I think most people get the RASC weekly report. And with that, I'm going to stop my share. And let's see, Nathan, you had something you wanted to share. Have you got a way to share your screen?
Oh, yes. Can everyone see that? Oops. So this, I think it should be playing. Oops. Sorry. There we go. So over the last month, I've been imaging Mars with an iPhone. And I've just finished putting it all together into a completed rotation sequence. Now these images aren't John McDonald or anything, but yeah, I'm pretty pleased with the result, and like I think it's a pretty smooth rotation. Now I could have done this I could have done this in 2 nights, one covering the first half and one covering the second half, but like since Mars's rotation takes a little longer than Earth's, you see a slightly different part each night, and you can kind of use that to your advantage to get the full rotation while not having to do all-nighters.
Over how long?
Oh, yeah, I got these over about a month, and I observed for about like maybe 4 hours at a time. So a total of 6 observation sessions approximately. I wasn't really counting. But anyway, this is my gift. Oops.
Well, that's amazing, Nathan. You did that with a handheld iPhone on a Dobsonian, is that correct?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Wow.
Wow.
That's terrific. Thanks for sharing that. Does anyone else have anything to share tonight? Well,
I'd like to show off my drawing from last night. I have 8 features left to do on the Isabel Williamson Lunar Observing Program. And so let's get this right. This was, I had to go down to the beach because there was going to be clouds coming in later in the night when the moon was at a reasonable altitude, elevation. And so I went there around midnight last night, and it was just glorious. Anyway, so this was for the Rima Hesiotis, which is, where's my finger? Right around here. Very hard to see. I've tried about 3 times to get it, but it has to be right on the terminator. And I wasn't going to miss last night because I'm so close to the end. I have 6 left to do, and it's late in the lunar month, so they're all going to be middle of the night things to look for. But I might get it this calendar year. That's my hope.
Very nice.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay. Is there anyone else who have something to share? Well, if that's the case, our next monthly meeting was going to take place on December 7th. And our speaker for that is a Hertzberg fellow, Abedin. And he did his PhD thesis on modeling meteoroid swarms. And since we have the Geminids coming up soon, that might be in mid-December, that might be a pretty interesting talk as well. And until that, we have, I guess, just our regular Astro Cafe next Monday. So I'm signing off. I'd like to thank Chris for being our technical host and appreciate that. And I should also mention that we're looking for other people to volunteer as a host of Astro Cafe. And please let us know. It's kind of fun to do this job. And one of the main advantages of it is that you have the power to mute the president. So keep that in mind. So please let Chris know. And thanks again, Jay, for joining us. And we really enjoyed your presentation. It was great. And all the best, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.